Hey, it's Soul with Revendreth, the fourth and maybe final episode of the Afterlives series. I'm going to run through the usual formula with the cinematic breakdown. I'll circle back with some additional analysis, and then wrap it up with some concluding thoughts on the Afterlives series as a whole. In the case of Revendreth, it's the shortest of the four cinematics at under 4 minutes, but in those 4 minutes, it hits all the points that tell the story of this realm. So let's get started. The cinematic opens up with darkness and screams, flashes of light, and more screams. Deeper into this dungeon we go until all is revealed. A familiar orc, Garrosh Hellscream, surprise! And then one more scream for good measure, to mark one of the many grisly truths of what happens in Revendreth. But what it is not that quite illustrated, at least not until we get to this second introduction. The remainder of the cinematic is a penned letter narrated by Sire Denathrius, the ruler of the realm, in an address to his people. But many of you should be familiar with that kind of messaging meant to mislead the audience, and we as viewers see the awful truth. I tend to fall for this method all the time though. It just says so much about this guy's hubris, the way that he twists words, the gaslighting, despite what's painfully obvious. It's almost no wonder that's even in his chambers that he's armed. Kind of interesting because no other Venthyr in this cinematic is, except for the Stoneborn, those gargoyle-like people. Anyway, a scribe is taking Denathrius' words in written form. I'm not sure if we're supposed to know who that is, but we'll circle back to him real quick later. Denathrius describes the role of Revendreth, to help sinners repent for their crimes in life. He describes it as theirs, the Venthyr's holy mission, that it's their priority, that it's effective, that this incredibly painful looking process is still better than being thrown into the maw. I admit it's a little bit hard to tell which is actually worse. Denathrius continues, informing his people in this sickeningly sarcastic tone that the flow of souls into Revendreth has stopped, resulting in an Anima shortage. And so, on top of the regular farming of Anima from souls like Garrosh, the people of Revendreth also give up Anima from their own bodies to help maintain the realm. Denathrius notes that there is a rich and poor, a caste system of sorts within Revendreth, which makes the rest of this storyline feel pretty predictable. The people with barely enough are told to sacrifice, while the upper class literally drink from it. Conservation and rationing, Denathrius says. Rationing for him and his buddies, who are the so-called most in need. But not all of Revendreth is unified. One Venthyr, who doesn't want his Anima to go to the man, plays the example and tries to scurry off to help those who are actually in need until he's caught. Again, we're familiar with this sort of story, where the bad guys are the ones in charge. Between their muscle, their propaganda, and information control, they've got Revendreth under their thumb, their kind of control. Punishment in Revendreth comes in the form of sun exposure, which appears to have incredibly harmful but not fatal effects, which makes this all the better to scare people into obedience. Even the scribe as shown from earlier is being dutiful, but notice his scowl as Denathrius pours himself another round of drinky drink, which could probably help out a lot of people otherwise. Tensions and resistance are building. But that pretty much wraps up the cinematic in a dance of elegance and cruel deception. The cinematic was, as usual, very easy to understand, but let's take a closer look. I released a video earlier on what I think the truth of the Shadowlands is, which is a machine that uses death as a resource. As part of that machine, the souls that go to Revendreth may be of those who committed great sins, but I've speculated that these bad boys and girls are simply more rich with Anima if they happen to have committed misdeeds. It's also pretty clear to me at least that Revendreth plays a large part in distributing Anima throughout all of the Shadowlands. Revendreth tells the story of how Anima is acquired in the Shadowlands, while Ardenweald shows a glimpse of how it's spent. There's questing and cutscenes that give a bit more context, but let's not get away from the cinematic. The way I see it, Revendreth is nothing less than a terrible, terrible place for terrible people. Bad people are brought here and are effectively milked like cows until they got no more Anima left to give. After being sucked dry or otherwise, I guess redeeming themselves, they can then leave the realm, maybe go to Ardenweald to be an eternal gardener, Maldraxxus to be sacrificed in battle, or Bastion to have their mind wiped and turned into a gardener of souls so they can be put through the same grinder. Or they can become Venthyr themselves and have an opportunity to be the torturers instead of the tortured. Yikes. I obviously have a pretty low opinion of the Shadowlands as a realm that we champions of Azeroth are supposed to protect, so we'll see if I'm ever convinced otherwise. So let's briefly look back at all of the Afterlife cinematics and do some comparisons and such, because one of the takeaway phrases that I've heard and read was that Afterlives was meh, or underwhelming, or just okay. At least when you compare these cinematics to previously released ones. And you know what? That's okay. At least when you compare these cinematics to the likes of Lords of War, or Harbingers, or Warbringers. And that's totally okay. Trust your gut. But let's take another look at what these cinematics were all about. Lords of War, Harbingers, Warbringers. They were largely about a central character, and it's easy to connect with familiar characters. Afterlives was about the Shadowlands, not a person, but a place. Each episode was named after 4 of its realms, which should have hinted to us, the viewers, that this is what Afterlives would be all about. So I found it to be a little bit odd that the first episode, Bastion, had almost nothing to do with Bastion. It should have been called Afterlives Uther, because it was his story, from life to death to something else. And that's what we're used to, right? Character-centric stories. In my personal headcanon, I think Bastion is the most poorly written of the 4 episodes because it told me next to nothing about what the point of Bastion is. Meanwhile, some critics have railed on Maldraxxus because it forced a female character as its front person, so we all have something to say. But what Afterlife succeeds in doing is telling the story that not all is well in the land of the dead. Resources are short, things that shouldn't be happening are happening, there's infighting and corruption at its highest levels, and we are going to be thrust into the middle of it. Many have asked, though, if there's going to be a hidden 5th episode of Afterlives. Earlier, we were treated with the Old Soldier cinematic after the Warbringer series concluded. Next week, we might look at 1 or 2 of the other known realms of the Shadowlands, like Oribos, the pipeline where all souls flow through, and of course the Maw, where all souls are apparently flowing into. There's a lot to possibly learn, like what broke the Shadowlands, what drove Sylvanas to do what she's done, and how far back did her plans go. And of course, what of the Jailer? Given that we're seeing an image of him, it's more likely a cinematic will focus on him a bit. Maybe we'll start to see Blizzard sell this brand new character as our villain for the next few years. I'm pretty excited to see what's in store, but hey, what do you think? Leave your thoughts about Revendreth and the Afterlife series in a comment below. It'd be great if you were to subscribe to the channel in a show of support so that you know when you can see more stuff like this and all things Warcraft. We'll see you next time, folks. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.